Imagine riding into a dusty frontier town wearing the cleanest white hat money could buy. Instead of respect, everyone stares at you. Some laugh, others quietly move away. You've just announced something about yourself without saying a single word. And no, it's not that you're rich. It's not that you're a hero. In the real Old West, a spotless white hat usually meant one thing. You didn't work. Not didn't work hard, didn't work at all. Because in the actual American frontier, a hat like that couldn't survive a single day on a cattle drive. And if you're picturing every classic Western you've ever seen, that probably doesn't match what you thought you knew about cowboys. So let's ask the real question. Why does Hollywood love white hats so much, when the men who actually lived that life almost never wore them? Most of what we think we know about cowboys didn't come from the 1800s. It came from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, decades after the frontier had already closed. Studios needed a fast way to tell audiences who the good guy was before he even spoke a line. So, they gave him a clean white hat. The villain got a black one. Simple, efficient, completely made up. That visual shortcut worked so well that it rewired how generations of people imagined the West. But the real cowboys, the ones actually driving cattle across Texas, Kansas, and Wyoming, were living a completely different reality. One where a white hat wasn't a symbol of heroism, it was a liability. To understand why, we have to go back further than Hollywood, back to where the cowboy hat actually came from. The hat cowboys wore wasn't originally American at all. It traces back to Mexican vaqueros, skilled horsemen who'd been working cattle across the Southwest long before the word cowboy existed. Their wide-brimmed hats were built for one purpose: survival under a merciless sun. When Anglo-American ranch hands adopted the style, they didn't inherit a fashion statement. They inherited a piece of equipment. And equipment, unlike costumes, has to actually function. Now picture your day as a working cowboy in, say, 1875. You've been riding since before sunrise. The sun is already brutal, and there's no shade for miles. Cattle kick up dust with every step, thousands of pounds of hoof and hide grinding the dry earth into a fine brown cloud that hangs in the air for hours. That dust doesn't politely settle on the ground. It settles on you, on your shoulders, your collar, your hat. By midday, a light-colored hat isn't light anymore. It's the same dull brown as everything else around you. By sunset, it's practically camouflaged into the landscape. A dark hat? It just looks like a hat that's been worked hard. Which is exactly what it was. Here's where things get strange, though. Dust wasn't even the biggest problem. Sweat was. You're wearing this hat 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, in Texas summer heat that can climb past 100 degrees, your body is constantly losing moisture, and a lot of it ends up right where your hat meets your forehead. On a dark hat, sweat stains blend in. Nobody notices. Nobody cares. On a white or cream-colored hat, every bead of sweat leaves a mark that doesn't wash out. Within days, not weeks, days, a pale hat would be streaked with yellow-brown rings that never fully disappeared. Now add rain. Add mud. Add the grime of sleeping on the ground, wiping your hands on whatever's nearest, and spending months without reliable access to clean water, let alone laundry service. You start to see the problem. A white hat wasn't stylish on the frontier. It was a maintenance nightmare nobody had time for. And that raises an obvious question. If white hats were this impractical, who was actually wearing them? The answer is almost the opposite of what movies taught us. Wealthy ranch owners, businessmen, performers in traveling Wild West shows like the ones Buffalo Bill Cody built into a full-blown entertainment industry. These were people whose hats didn't need to survive a cattle drive because they weren't doing the cattle drive. A clean white hat was a status symbol precisely because it proved you didn't spend your day covered in dust and sweat. It was the frontier equivalent of showing up to a construction site in a tailored suit. Impressive, sure. But it told everyone watching that you weren't the one doing the actual labor. Meanwhile, the actual working cowboys, the ones roping cattle, breaking horses, and riding drag behind a herd for 16 hours straight, gravitated toward browns, grays, and darker earth tones. Not because it looked tough, because it was practical. A dark hat hid dirt, hid sweat, and didn't need constant cleaning that most cowboys couldn't afford anyway, since a decent hat could cost close to a month's wages. So somewhere between the 1880s and the 1930s, something got completely flipped. The color that once signaled "I don't do physical labor" became the color Hollywood used to signal hero. And the color that once signaled hardworking, practical, experienced became the color used for villains. That's not history. That's a costume department decision. Here's the part that makes this even stranger, though. Early Western films weren't even trying to be historically accurate. They were trying to be readable on grainy black and white film from the back row of a theater. Directors needed instant visual contrast so audiences could track who was good and who was bad without dialogue. White reads as bright and clean on old film stock. Black reads as sharp and dramatic. It had nothing to do with what real cowboys wore, and everything to do with what worked on a screen with limited resolution and no color. Once that visual language caught on, it never let go. Studios kept repeating it because audiences responded to it. Actors like Tom Mix and later singing cowboys like Roy Rogers and Gene Autry cemented the white hat as the uniform of the good guy. By the time color film arrived, the pattern was already locked in. Nobody questioned it anymore. It had become the language of the genre itself, but real cowboy culture pushed back against this quietly in ways most people never noticed. Working cowboys who lived through the actual era, and the ranchers who came after them, often found the movie version almost laughable. Not because it was flattering, because it was backwards. The idea that a hero would ride into a dust storm, work cattle for 16 hours, and somehow emerge with a spotless white hat wasn't just unrealistic. It was the opposite of what real skill and experience looked like. An experienced cowhand's hat told a story just by looking at it. Sweat-stained, sun-faded, shaped by years of being gripped, folded, and reshaped by the same weathered hands. That hat had earned its color. It hadn't been kept clean. It had been kept useful. There's something almost poetic about that, if you think about it. The real symbol of expertise on the frontier wasn't a hat that stayed clean. It was a hat that clearly hadn't. And that single detail says something bigger about how we remember history in general. We don't usually remember what actually happened. We remember whatever version got turned into the best story. The version that was easiest to film, easiest to sell, easiest to repeat. The real cowboy, dust-covered, sunburned, exhausted by sundown, wasn't cinematic enough to sell tickets. So an entire industry quietly replaced him with someone cleaner, sharper, and easier to root for in 90 minutes or less. That replacement worked so well that most people today have never even questioned it. So next time you see a white hat riding across a movie screen, you'll know what you're actually looking at, not a cowboy, a costume. Real cowboys didn't wear white hats because they weren't trying to look heroic. They were trying to survive another day under a sun that didn't care how good you looked. The white hat wasn't born on the frontier. It was born on a movie set.